When I heard Christopher Nolan would be directing the Odyssey with his questionable, aka insane adaptations and casting decisions, keep in mind this is one of the most foundational texts in Western literature, I laughed, knowing that I would not touch this movie with a metaphorical 10-foot pole, barring some divine intervention or revelation from the heavens. So when Jonathan Pageau comes in like a bull in the china shop of my tender sensibilities and fragile emotions related to Hollywood's degradation and subversion of my beloved Western culture, masculinity, and Christian values, shouting from the rooftops that Christopher Nolan had tricked us all, this movie isn't a progressive, ideologically possessed, woke slop piece of garbage. It's actually good. The story and symbolism are beautiful. I laughed again because I'd already seen enough. There's no way. This movie is garbage. Jonathan's drinking the Kool-Aid, and I'm not the only one. His comment section from that video is just littered with conservative frustration and orthobro rage in all its glory, and I was right there with them until I thought, when was the last time Pageau got it wrong? He's been fighting anti-Christian narratives like this for years, and his symbolic insights are arguably the best in the business, along with his brother. And so I thought, there must be something good in here. Will it be enough? Probably not, but I'll give it a shot. And thank God I did. Here's my thoughts after watching and analyzing the symbolic patterns in this movie. And before we jump into this, bear in mind, this does not take away from the dumb casting decisions. And there are maybe one or two scenes that I rolled my eyes at before realizing the full message that those scenes were trying to get across. But yeah, let's dive into the story and symbolism of the Odyssey by Christopher Nolan.
The story that Christopher Nolan told, the way he told it, is one of the most meta things I've ever seen. The entire movie is a Trojan horse. At first, I was watching the movie. I was actually, annoyed with some things and then really enjoying the movie. And then I started to see what Christopher Nolan was doing. And I realized, oh my goodness, this is absolutely brilliant.
So it turns out Jonathan Pageau was right about Christopher Nolan and the Odyssey. And I'm planning on going into more detail in the next video on this. But in this video, I'm going to go over the symbolic patterns in the Odyssey that clearly show that what Jonathan Pageau was on about in his last video. So Christopher Nolan's latest film, The Odyssey, it's good. And that really threw me for a loop because, at this point, we're all so used to the opposite pattern, that classic bait and switch, where they bait you with golden beauty and it turns out to be complete filth with a thin veneer of beauty. It turns out to be a gilded ball of trash, basically. But Nolan actually turns out to be a bit of a trickster in this one.
If you want to know what it is that Christopher Nolan's doing in this movie, you have to look at the places where Nolan changed the story.
For whatever reason, he gilded a golden story, right? Imagine a golden sphere of a story that's has a thin veneer of filth around it. Very strange. I don't think I've ever seen anybody do this.
Christopher Nolan takes what on the outside looks like giving in to kind of postmodern tropes about using diversity as a political tool, changing, race swapping, gender swapping, doing all that with the characters that people do for a political tool, and transforms it, turns it into a Trojan horse for an amazing story, for a story that we need to see, and a story that is desperately one that we want and need to hear right now.
There's no getting around that filth, though, right? The fact that there is real filth, what most of us would regard as filth, to wipe away. And to many of us, that filth ruins it completely, like a fly in a pie or something like this. But keep in mind that it's roughly 2 to 3 minutes total of the progressive actress and actor screen time. And by the way, those progressive actors embody and deliver pretty conservative, traditional, properly aligned patterns and messages in their dialogue, it's such a confusing film in that way.
This movie is a Trojan horse. This movie is like a reverse Trojan horse where he has put on a kind of veneer of postmodernism, but inside is the story of the return of the king, the return of the father, the remembering of your home, the returning home, and then the passing of authority to the son, the ennobling of the son who will replace the father in an act of filiation rather than an act of revolution, which is what we've seen in the past decades in storytelling.
The core of the story truly is the return of the father and the return of the king. And one of the core messages kind of brings you back to the Lion King days, if you watched that cartoon back when you were a child. The message from Mufasa, from the father, to remember who you are. And this remembrance is a core theme of the film, and it's directed at us in America, in the West, a society that has lost sight of the proper aim and has sent the father into exile, not unlike Odysseus's wandering in exile and 7 years of forgetting who he was as the father and the king. Before his proper alignment with the good, you could say, and his penance, so to speak, and his ultimate inevitable return. This story, whether it was on accident or on purpose, I don't know how this couldn't be done on purpose, but some of the messaging I actually think could possibly be accidental. Regardless, it hurls that message and others like it, messages of virtue, of truth. It just buries those messages in the mind with razor sharp patterns of meaning, and it's impactful. It's very impactful, I have to say. That meaning is embedded in these symbolic patterns, amongst others. There's no way I could go over all of the details, of course. I'm going to try to do that more thoroughly in the next video, but here's a general overview of the patterns that you're going to see if you watch this movie. The pattern of proper sacrifice of the father, in particular, contrasted with the improper sacrifice of Cain, you could call it, that we see in the corrupted father in Agamemnon, who sacrifices his infant child for his own glory and power. And that's a really interesting, potentially accidental message that we see in the film of, let's just say it's related to child sacrifice. And there is a very modern version of that pattern, as we all know. And then there's the pattern of missing the mark, right? Hamartia, sin, right? That archery term, hamartia, of missing the mark, contrasted with the virtuous ability to aim properly and hit the mark. And we see this in the ability of Odysseus, the father, to aim properly, morally speaking. We see that throughout the story. We see it literally with his bow and symbolically, of course, and most importantly, perhaps, in possibly the heaviest hitting scene of the movie, or at least one of them, which is related to his bow and accuracy. The bow in the test near the end, which perfectly symbolizes the ideal role of the father, serving by properly hitting the mark, to protect his family, to serve his family, to win his queen and protect the sanctity of their marriage, and so much more. This film brings us back into the ancient understanding of reality as well, and that these patterns were very fascinating to me, that we actually went there. Not perfectly, but beautifully nonetheless, right? The reality that there is a cosmic order, a divine order that casts the father into exile and even death when it's broken, but propels or returns the masculine, the father figure, and his progeny into success and to the throne potentially when the father aligns himself with this order. And there's an interesting twist that he makes in that structure that is beautifully done. It's not what you're probably not what you're expecting when you think of that pattern, but it's good. It's actually good. And of course, the primary pattern is the return of the Father, the return of the King, which is ultimately embodied in Christ and his story, the ultimate story, right? The ultimate return of the King. And this story of Odysseus's return makes him something like a flawed type of Christ, very much so. There are so many similarities between the two stories, and you can see that in the original, of course, and in this film. There's the symbolism of the divine feminine in Athena. I mean, she's literally the divine feminine. And interestingly, it is the actions of a tricked soldier played by the woke icon Pageau that ultimately causes the violent sack of the city of Troy, which claims Athena as their guardian. And the only two main characters in and associated with this city in the movie are Helen of Troy, one of the woke or progressive icons, and Athena, the divine feminine. Interesting symbolism here. Without going into too much detail, basically, the archetypal icons of feminism and woke or progressive ideology are tricked, defeated, beheaded, toppled. And Helen even apologizes in her role in Troy to Penelope through Odysseus' son. I have a hard time pronouncing his name. And the archetypal icons of not just feminism and progressive ideology, but also the divine feminine. And this isn't necessary. Well, I won't go into more details on that. The most important thing to me as I watched this movie was the ultimate end and purpose of the story. Was it going to continue this modern trend of tearing down the father figure, spitting on masculinity, properly ordered masculinity even, uprooting our Western tradition and Christian values, or does it support them, align with them? That was the big question for me, of course, as it is for most of us, I think, most of the viewers of this channel. And after watching, I can say confidently, Pageau was right. Somewhat surprisingly, I figured he'd be generally right, or at least arguably right. But after watching the movie, it was actually very clear to me, no, he was completely right. And there's no really doubting it, at least for me, after seeing the patterns in this movie. There's really just no confusion after watching the film. Christopher Nolan, almost shockingly, to me at least, took an almost anti-woke path. In fact, I think you could argue that it is an anti-progressive film when you're speaking of the core messages, the core messages and the primary message of the film in relation to the return of the father, the return of the king and Odysseus in true trickster fashion. The twists and the turns in the story are very well done, and they don't end up twisting our arm trying to get us to accept some hyper-progressive agenda the way that we've grown to expect. But in fact, it does the opposite in the end, in a way that really makes you think, unlike most modern movies. So all that to say, I'd highly recommend this movie. If I had to rate it, I haven't even thought about what I'd rate it. Maybe 9 out of 10. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I would call it a complete masterpiece, but it's got to be at least an 8 or 9 out of 10. And very well worth watching, in particular because it does not have a hyper progressive agenda, and it seems very much to have the precise opposite. Actually, I think I can prove that to you, and I'm going to try to do that in the next film. Or excuse me, I'm going to try to do that in the next video. Yeah, if you're interested, let me know if you have any insights from watching the movie yourself, or insights before watching the movie. Let me know. I know it's easy to jump to conclusions with this one, as I did, and the only reason I watched this film was because Jonathan Pageau recommended it very highly, and so I thought, well, he's usually right. I mean, I don't know if he's ever steered me wrong, so I'm going to give it a go, and I'm very glad I did. So I'd encourage you to check it out, see what you think, and yeah, if you like this video, please give it a like, share, subscribe, all the good stuff, and I will see you in the next one.